Okay, so let's start. If people join in, hopefully they'll pick up from where we are. So this week's parsha, as you probably all know, is Parshat Bo, and it contains the last three of the plagues. Last week we had the first seven. This week we have the last three, and it is dramatic, but it should be possibly even more dramatic if you think about it. We're standing at the edge of history. The most powerful empire of the ancient world is about to collapse. Um, Paro, who represented and presented himself as a god, is now exposed as this frightened, reactive, powerless individual. A nation that's been enslaved for centuries is about to walk free. Redemption is no longer theoretical, but it's now imminent. It's about to happen. And what we find is that juxtaposed in the narrative of the plagues, we have um, we have laws being taught. So rather than the heightening of the drama being heightened, and instead of accelerating the pace towards the triumphant escape and the last of the plagues, the Torah does something quite strange. And what it does, it slows down. And as I said, juxtaposed in the narrative of the plagues and all the punishment, it begins to teach laws, detailed laws, ritual laws, instructions about the calendars, instruction about food, instruction about memory, children, symbols, daily discipline. And at the precise moment when the Jewish people are about to leave Egypt, at the climax of the story, if you like, the Torah appears almost uninterested in the escape itself. It seems quite bizarre. If you were to imagine that the Torah was a novel, or let's say it was a film, the audience, people watching are primed for the escape, they're primed for the liberation, and suddenly the plot pauses for a technical detail. You'd probably think there that the director, the scriptwriter, is going to be a fire. You know, what are you doing? You've built up the plot to this crescendo. Now all of a sudden you go and you're now writing about laws. So what is it all about? And we need to understand that the Torah is not trying to entertain us. Torah isn't that novel. Torah isn't that movie. But within the story, and part of the story is there to actually educate us. And our Parshat Bo, is making a statement that defines Judaism forever. And what I mean by that, this parsha is not so much about leaving Egypt, but it's more about what freedom actually means. And the Torah's definition of freedom is, in fact, if we think about it, it might even be counterintuitive to modern ears. So modernity or people today would say that freedom is the absence of obligations. What Torah would say is, how do we find freedom? Freedom really is the acceptance of purpose, of clinging on to, of holding meaning in one's life. So let's go through the three plagues, and then we'll see how hopefully how it all connects with the various mitzvot and the ultimate purpose of the Torah in this week's parsha, teaching us through the plagues what liberation, what freedom is really about. Okay, so the third last plague is the one of Arbe, which is translated as locusts. Um, and I think we can say that Arbe, the locust, is actually a psychological turning point in the entire story. And why I say that is because up until now, yes, Egypt is suffering terribly. There's blood in the waters, frogs in the houses, disease in the livestock, hail destroying crop. Egypt is battered, bruised, humiliated, bleeding, but suffering alone doesn't produce change. And what we find, human nature and Egypt and Egyptians were no different, is that people are capable of enduring pain if they believe that it's temporary. As long as people can say, you know, this will pass, we have the amazing ability to almost be able to tolerate anything. So what we have up until this point of locusts, the plague of locusts, is Egypt, or the Egyptians keep telling themselves the same story. Yes, this is bad, but it will survive. We faced crises before. We're Egypt, we'll always recover. We're this main superpower. And even after the plague of hail, so that would be the last plague of last week's Parsha, something still remains. And the Torah is very deliberate in emphasizing this carefully, that not everything was destroyed, that some crops survived, and some produce escaped the destruction, the devastation of the previous plague, that being hail. Um, and that's all that hope needs, right? That's all you need for hope to linger. Hope doesn't need abundance. Hope just needs that there's something. There's something left over. There's something I can still hold on to. And then comes Hashem, and then Hashem brings Arabah, the locusts. And Moshe warns Pharaoh that the locusts will eat. It says, Yeter hapleita hanisheret lachem min habarad. The English translation, the remainder that escaped, that which was left for you from the hail. Now that phrase is devastating, because Egypt is no longer clinging to prosperity, it's clinging to remnants, that which remained, to scraps, to whatever is left after the devastation of the hail. And Hashem now says in this third last plague that even that isn't secure. Because what happens with the hail? Hail is destruction from above. It's sudden, it's violent, it's dramatic. But then when the storm ends, people begin rebuilding almost immediately. Locusts, this particular plague is totally different. Locusts don't only strike once, they consume slowly, relentlessly, completely. They're the ultimate consumer. And you don't fight locusts. What happens is you just watch your future disappear. All those scraps, all those remnants are just being absolutely consumed without any stop. Egypt believed that it controlled the Nile, it controlled agriculture, controlled labor, controlled history itself. And now the locusts come and they, if you like, announce a terrifying truth that this control never existed. No planning can stop the locusts. No power can negotiate with them. No empire intimidates the locusts. And that's why we actually find in this plague that Pharaoh's own officials finally break ranks. And they come up to Pharaoh. Again, these are his own people, his innermost sanctuary, if you like. And they actually say to Pharaoh, how much longer is this going to be for us? A snare, I think is the right translation. And they say, send the men and let them serve Hashem, obviously referring to the Israelites. And they say something so stark. They say to Pharaoh, do you not yet know that Egypt is lost? Do you not yet know that Egypt is lost? It's an extraordinary moment. Again, they're not rebels. These are not slaves. These are the insiders, the administrators, the elites, the people that in fact invented the system, the hierarchy, that are so instrumental, so part of the actual system itself. They're no longer saying we're suffering. They're saying we're finished. They understand what Pharaoh refuses to admit, that this is no longer a crisis. It's the end of a civilization as it knows itself, as the Egyptians and as Egypt knows itself. So again, the locusts took away every last remnant of hope, of belief, that small crop that remained. The Torah tells us that even before the plague of darkness, which I'll go into shortly, the next plague, the locusts themselves caused darkness because just the swarms of locusts blocked out the sun. And if you think about the sun being the symbol for hope and renewal, well, even that's been blocked out now by the plague of locusts. They cannot see the sun. Everything is being taken away. And what happens is that Pharaoh, he responds with a compromise. And he asks Moshe, who's going? Okay, you say you want to go out and worship your God. You want to leave the city. You want to leave town. Who's going? And Moshe says, everyone's going, young and old, sons and daughters, flocks, all the animals are coming with us. And as you know, Pharaoh scoffs and he says, well, what do you mean? It's only the adults who need to serve God. Children aren't involved in serving God. Let the children stay. And what we actually find here with the Pharaoh's compromise, it's not really compromise, it's strategy. What he profoundly understands is that whoever controls the children is ultimately in control of the future. Um, and he's willing to say, I'm happy to have religion, go and worship, as long as Egypt retains ownership of tomorrow, tomorrow obviously being symbolized in the children. And Moshe refuses. Moshe says no, because obviously he knows that the Torah is teaching us something fundamental, something essential, that freedom can't be partial. And obviously, and certainly, if your children aren't free, then you're not free. If your future is being held hostage, then your very present is meaningless. Just want to mute. Give me a second. Um, okay, I think it's everyone muted. Sorry about that. We find in this plague as well, just as we had with all the other plagues, we have the concept of midah keneged midah. Hashem is punishing or bringing on the plagues measure for measure. The locusts, as I said, came to consume, and they absolutely consumed everything. Egypt built itself on consumption. It consumed labor, dignity, human life. It was all about excess consumption. And now finally, Egypt is finally consumed. Arabet, the plague of locusts, destroys Egypt, and Egypt illusion that life can continue. And in fact, their life, their prosperity, their agriculture, their economy, everything that was still left, Yeter HaPleita, that which escaped the destruction of the hail, now finally is wiped away as well. Any lingering hope is absolutely wiped out. Okay, then it brings us to the penultimate plague of choshech, of darkness. And the Torah says that there was a thick darkness. It wasn't just dark in the normal sense that we know that, okay, lights are out, kids, time for bed, everything looks dark. But it says that person wasn't able to see his brother, lo ra'u ish et achiv, and it says that no person rose from his place. And Chazal, our rabbis teach us that the darkness was so heavy, v'yamesh choshech, they felt the darkness. It actually paralyzed them physically. Those that were standing couldn't sit. Those that were sitting couldn't stand up. Um, and the real meaningful phrase that Torah says is a person couldn't see his brother. And that really sums up what Egypt was all about. We're not talking about physical eyesight, the ability to physically see, but what we're speaking about over here is moral blindness. And darkness happens when society loses the ability to recognize the dignity or to recognize the humanity of the next person. And Egypt, as we know, had normalized cruelty. It was state policy was oppression. It benefited from the suffering of the slaves, of the Israelites for so long that suffering became invisible, right? They could no longer see it. So that if someone cried out, and I'll come back to that again in the plague of the firstborn, but they just didn't see it anymore. And Hashem punishes them like, again, midah keneged midah, you're not seeing the suffering of others. I'm going to make it physically as well that that's not going to be possible. Darkness isn't ignorance. Darkness isn't the absence of light. It's darkness in this sense means indifference or apathy to the feelings, the dignity, the humanity of other people. And what does it say? To contrast the Bnei Israel, to contrast what is happening for the children of Israel against the darkness of the Israelites, as it says, Ulachol Bnei Israel, and to all the children of Israel, Haya or b'moshvatam, there was light in their dwelling places. Again, this doesn't mean that there was no load shedding in the land of Goshen. Doesn't mean that they had better quality candles, that their light burned brighter, but it means simply that even as slaves, right, even degraded, even on the lowest social standing in Egypt, the Israelites still had the core family, they had memory, they had identity, hope. They could still see one another. They still cared for one another. They still felt like one big family. And there was a stark difference between the Israelites, Haya Or B'Moshvatam, having light in their dwelling places, and the Egyptians having darkness. Again, their darkness was their inability to see the suffering of others. Hashem actually brings about and manifest and express thick darkness that actually paralyzes and entraps them. Rashi, as you're probably familiar, also brings two explanations. Why specifically the additional explanations, if you like, regarding this plague of darkness. The one is that they were among the Jewish people, and in fact, according to many commentaries, most commentaries, the majority of the Jewish people didn't want to leave. Didn't want to leave Egypt, didn't believe in this new hope, in this new future. Even though they were suffering, it's almost like rather the devil we know than the devil we don't know. They didn't want to escape. And Hashem wanted to wipe them out, but wipe them out in a way that the Egyptians wouldn't say, well, look, the plagues didn't only affect us, it affected the Jewish people as well. So these people who weren't righteous and in fact didn't want to be redeemed, Hashem caused the plague of darkness that they would be killed during this plague of darkness and be disposed of. That's one reason, one additional reason. A second additional reason that's given is that during the plague of darkness, the Jewish people could go around the Egyptians' home. Um, Obviously, the Egyptians can't see anything, but the Israelites could in the very same home that the Egyptians could see nothing, the Israelites could see. And they would go around looking where all the jewelry, all the assets of the Egyptians were stored. Why? Because when it came, and Hashem is going to say to the Jewish people that you're not going to leave Egypt empty-handed. You're going to ask of your neighbor, clay chesed, clay zahav, silver and gold and fabrics, because I made a promise to Abraham that when I redeem you from Egypt, you're going to leave birchush gadol with the great wealth. And I have to keep my oath to Abraham and make sure that when you leave this slavery, you're going to go out with great wealth. So when the Jewish people would then ask the Egyptians for their wealth, their gold, the silver, and the Egyptians would reply, "No, what are you talking about? We don't have gold, we don't have silver." The Israelites could actually pinpoint and say, "What are you talking about? We know the candlesticks, the gold candlesticks are in this cupboard, and the krugerrands are in that cupboard." So they had prior scoping out of the area, if you like, that they'd be able to know exactly where everything was. So those are two additional reasons that Rashi brings. Okay. Um, why the darkness precedes the death of the firstborn. The order is deliberate. First, Egypt loses the illusion that tomorrow exists. Then Egypt loses the ability to see another human being. Only after society loses its soul can it face judgment, and that's what's absolutely coming now. And the final plague does come at the Makat Bechorot, the death of the firstborn. Um, and straight away, there are fundamental differences between this plague and all the others. First of all, it's much more, if I can say, intimate. It enters their homes. It happens at night. It strikes families. Um, and to really understand the gravity or the enormity of this plague, we need to understand what firstborn represented in the ancient world. Of course, we know firstborn also has an important part to play in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, but an even greater part generally in the ancient non-Jewish world. We know that the firstborn wasn't just the eldest child, but the firstborn embodied the whole concept of continuity, inheritance, legacy. It really symbolized the future. And to strike at the firstborn was to say that this system has no tomorrow. It's gone. There's no legacy. There's no legacy. Egypt did not only enslave individuals, what Egypt did is it enslaved generations. Pharaoh didn't only exploit labor, but he attempted to control destiny. And therefore, this final plague of Makat Bechorot plague strikes the future itself, strikes those firstborn who represent the future. Earlier, Hashem declares, he says, Beni Bechori Israel, Israel is my firstborn son. And again, midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Egypt attempted to destroy the Israelites' future by killing the Jewish baby boys, by crushing families, by crushing family life, by erasing continuity. And now Egypt experiences that very same truth is now imposed onto them. Now comes to them. Midah keneged midah, measure for measure. A society that looks to destroy the future of another society cannot have a future for itself. Simple. Why at night? Again, one of the big differences, all the other plagues we know happened in broad daylight. Why at night? Again, if you think about it, at night, all power is stripped away. Um, I can see where Naomi is listening to this, and I remember she used to sing a song about Pharaoh in pajamas in the middle of the night to the nursery school kids. And that's exactly it. Paro in the daylight is king, he's fancy. But at night, he's just a man in pajamas in his bed. He's just another parent, he's just another person. Um, in the day, Pharaoh's not broken as a ruler. Now at night, he's going to be absolutely shattered as a father. It's striking right in the home, right at night. Um, and that is so powerful. What you also have is Hashem saying quite categorically, emphatically, and of course, so much of this is part of the Haggadah. These past two Parshiot, and in particular, this Parsha of Bo finds its place in the Haggadah that we recite on Pesach. And Hashem says that I will pass through Egypt. I am not an angel. Why? Because it's not merely destruction. Destruction happened in all the other plagues in various forms. But this last plague is really judgment. And no intermediary, no angel can judge a civilization's moral responsibility. That is for Hashem himself. And then what does it say? What does the Torah say? That there was a great cry in Egypt, such that has never been and would never be heard again. That's how the Torah defines and describes this plague of the firstborn. And I think let's think about it as well. And again, the whole concept of midah, keneged midah, measure for measure. Egypt had caused countless cries, but it never heard them, right? I said before, darkness. They were blind to the suffering of others. They were equally deaf to the cries, to the shouts, to the screams of the Israelite families. And now Egypt hears itself. The greatest punishment before the death, or while the death is taking place, is the hearing it, is the recognition. And here they're hearing it in all its terrible glory, in all its terrible horror. We know that before this plague, the Israelites are told to, and I'll come into it, I'll rush through it, the mitzvot at the beginning of this parasha as well. But the Israelites take the blood of the lamb that they're going to sacrifice as a paschal sacrifice, and they're told to smear it on the lintel and the doorpost of their home. And Hashem would pass over the home, spare the Israelites, obviously just strike the firstborn Egyptians. Now we need to understand that blood wasn't magic. And the blood wasn't a marker for Hashem, because Hashem obviously knew in which homes the Israelites were. But what was it? It was really a declaration by the Israelites, the Jewish people themselves, to say that this home does not belong to Egypt's system. This home is clearly differentiated from the whole Egypt society, the whole Egypt way of life. And what it says in even greater terms is that redemption isn't passive, right? All these plagues have come up until this time. Yes, we've been passive as the Bnei Israel. We haven't had to do anything. But now that redemption is here and it's imminent, we can no longer be passive. We have to do something ourselves. And what do? We're making a clear mark. We're taking the blood and we're smearing it on the doorposts. And again, the blood was on the inside, not the outside, because the blood had to be seen by the Israelites themselves. God knew where the Israelites were. He didn't need a marker, he didn't need GPS. The Jews had to see it and they had to say, we're different. We're starkly different to these Egyptians. And that is how we're going to be when we go forward as a new nation after this redemption. I just want to touch on the mitzvot, and I'll come back to the issue of the blood when I speak about briefly the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach. We have in this week's Parshat the very first mitzvah that's given to the Bnei Yisrael as a collective. Why I say as a collective? Because one can argue, well, we already have the mitzvah of Pru-Revu, procreation. We already have the mitzvah of circumcision, but all those were given to individuals, right? Be it Adam, be it Noah, be it Abraham, etc. Here's the first time where as a people, Hashem gives them the mitzvah of Chodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim, that this month should be the first for you as the head of the month. And this is where we know that Nisan is the first month as it is in the Torah for counting. So we say the first month, it refers to Nisan. We get the law of Rosh Chodesh, how Moshe was supposed to observe the moon in its earliest form. And it actually says Hazeh, because Rashi says that Hashem actually pinpoints. Moshe was a bit confused how he'd be able to determine. And Moshe shows him the sliver of the moon and says that when you see that, that's when you proclaim the new moon. And why was it that it was so important that this mitzvah should be the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people, the mitzvah of time, is because slaves don't own their own time, right? They're told what to do, when to do. And when someone controls your schedule, when someone controls your time, simply put, your life isn't your own. And Judaism begins by reclaiming time. And by reclaiming time, we reclaim life, we reclaim our purpose. And history is no longer something that's just circular, but it's something that's purposeful. And we have to make sure that every moment, and this is what's being declared at the very foundation, the founding of our nation, is that time matters. And every moment is imbued with spiritual potential, and how we use that, or how we, God forbid, misuse or abuse it, defines our journey, absolutely defines our journey. The concept of killing time is absolutely an antithesis to Torah. Torah would never hear of a concept of, well, I'm just going to sit just for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, kill time. There's always something to be done. Make a phone call to someone, learn some Torah, and it tells us, what are we spending our time on? What are we prioritizing? Okay, I'm just mindful of the time. We have the concept, obviously, of matzah. Matzah, as you all know, chometz, happens naturally, right? Leaven, just leave it to its own devices, it's going to arise. Matzah requires restraint. Okay, don't just let it be to its own devices. There has to be a certain time. There's 18 minutes. We've got to act, and we've got to make sure that certain things don't happen. It brings about the concept of restraint, that part of freedom is having boundaries. Doesn't mean that you're absolutely free to, laissez-faire, to do whatever you want. No, there has to be restraint. There have to be boundaries, but within those boundaries, within those restraints, that's where you have your freedom. Chametz, as we know, symbolizes ego, the puffy, it rises. Matzah symbolizes humility. And again, freedom is not indulgence, right? The Israelites were shown how a society that consumes everything is itself consumed. So freedom isn't indulgence. It's not. What it is self-mastery. Yes, I may have, but what am I going to do with that which I have? What am I going to do? How am I going to make holy that which is already mutar, that which is already permissible to me? And we have the famous verse in this week's parsha where it says, Ushmartem et hamatzot, which means you should guard the matzahs, obviously meaning that they shouldn't become leaven. Make sure they remain matzah. But Rashi beautifully brings a midrashic explanation to say we can vowel that word differently, that it means ushmartem, not et hamatzot, but but rather et mitzvot, guard the mitzvahs. And just like, it's a beautiful concept, just like we don't want to wait for the matzah to rise and become leaven by time passing, so too, ha-mitzvah haba liyadcha, a mitzvah that comes into your hand, in other words, that you're able to do now, don't say, I can do it tomorrow, or I'm feeling a bit tired. No. Al tachmitzena, don't allow that opportunity, that mitzvah to become leaven. Don't let it become chometz. Ushmartem et mitzvot. Guard the mitzvah just like you guard the matzah. Make sure you're doing it now and you're not waiting, because God forbid that opportunity might pass you by. Okay, the whole concept, I said, the Korban Pesach was taken into the home on the 10th of Nisan. It showed bravery. Now the Jewish people are standing up. They're doing something to show that they're not beholden unto Egypt. They're taking the Egyptian God. The Egyptians are seeing it themselves, that here's the God being taken into the homes. It was kept there for 4 days to be examined, and it should be without blemish. And then it was ultimately sacrificed, and then obviously to be eaten. That's obviously where the blood came from, to smear the doorpost and the lintel. We have in this week's Parsha 4 times it mentions, emphasizes children asking questions. And again, this is so central to our religion, so central to the Haggadah, the Ma Nishtana, because freedom that's not transmitted, that doesn't allow for asking and for teaching by way of questions, isn't going to survive. And Pesach, the formation of our nation, built on the Haggadah, built on questions, that's the formula for Judaism and for us to survive. And Judaism only endures when parents speak to children, answer their questions, and when children are prepared and are free to ask the question. And that's the whole concept of the Haggadah. You also have in this week's Parsha the mitzvah of tefillin, and that's again within the tefillin we have paragraphs relating to so much of our religion, but the binding it on our arms is that physical, that tangible thing that we now moving thought, we're moving abstract into something concrete, into something that we're going to be doing. In other words, freedom is not just something abstract, it's not just an idea, but freedom must be lived, just like we put on tefillin daily, except of course Shabbos and Yom Tov, but freedom must be lived. Judaism must be lived daily, every single moment. So again, if I could just sum up in maybe just the last few seconds, that Parashas Bo teaches us that freedom is not escape. Real freedom is responsibility. Real freedom is structure. Real freedom is purpose and meaning. Egypt had power, but we see how quickly that was taken away from it. Israel, which has purpose and meaning, nothing can take that away from Israel. Please God, Am Yisrael Chai, Lanetzach, Am Yisrael will survive for in perpetuity. Wishing everyone have a good night. Wishing everyone a good Shabbos. Hope to see you all. Please God, at Shiur.